as I was telling producer Victor and tonight's guest off the air, the New York Yankees are going to be the death of me. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 339 of the Mike the New Haven podcast. The excitement I have over tonight's show will take the sting away from yesterday's loss. It was a bad one. I was watching it with a couple of friends, and they always do this. It's like I said before, it's not losing in October. It happens. You're not going to win every playoff game. That's any team, even the best of teams. You drop one, it's the playoffs. You're playing great teams. It's the way they lose. So we'll see what happens tonight with Game 4. I know the Mets are on in Game 5 trying to stay alive, and they're up 3-1 right now. So let's hope that they can force a Game 6. There's still hope for now, at least, for a Subway Series. Let's hope we get that. But in the meantime, we'll forget about the New York Yankees and all their troubles. And we'll focus on tonight's show, which, like I said, is one I've really been looking forward to for quite a long time now. I've worked years to get this guest. It took mutual friends getting us in touch. And one friend I want to shout out is Scott Wagner, retired NYPD detective, formerly out of the New York City Housing Police, too. He came over with the merger in 1995. Former guest of the show, was one of the subjects featured in my book, Good Folks, Mad City, Life on the Edge in the FDNY and NYPD. Scott was instrumental in setting up tonight's program, so I want to just give him a quick shout out real quick. Thank you very much, my friend. We'll talk soon. And very quickly, if you have not checked out the previous episode, that was the returning Tales from the Boom Room, profiles of the NYPD's arson, explosion, and bomb squad. Bill Ryan, retired NYPD first grade detective out of arson and explosion, came back on the show to talk about the 1998 apartment fire in Manhattan at Macaulay Culkin's family. That apartment that they owned, where unfortunately in that particular blaze, which happened December 23rd of 1998, 4 people were killed. So interesting look back at that case. It'll be an interesting show tonight. As always, we'll run a couple ads. We'll get the guest on with an introduction momentarily. And since I just mentioned Billy Ryan, we'll run his ad first. Ryan Investigative Group. The Mike the New Haven podcast is proudly sponsored and supported by the Ryan Investigative Group. If you need an elite PI, look no further than the elite Ryan Investigative Group, which is run by retired NYPD detective Bill Ryan, a 20-year veteran of the department who served the majority of his career in the Detective Bureau, most notably in the Arson and Explosion Squad. So if you need a PI to handle anything from fraud, legal services, and anything else that you might require, contact Bill at 347-417-1610. Again, 347-417-1610. Reach him at his website or the email that you see here. Again, if you need a PI, look no further than Bill Ryan and the Ryan Investigative Group, a proud supporter and sponsor of the Mike to New Haven podcast. Proud supporter indeed. Always grateful for Bill. And just real quick, instead of MC Media Editing Services, which you've heard about, we'll highlight Good Folks, Mad City, that picture, if we could pull it up real quick, as I just mentioned. It is my first book. It's been out since the summer. It's sold over 200 copies, which I'm happy about. Working on a second book, which I'll elaborate on as it gets closer to completion. But yes, the link to purchase it via Amazon is in the description. And it chronicles 20 NYPD stories, 20 FDNY stories, all excerpts taken from this program. If you haven't read it yet, if you want to get your hands on it, please feel free to do so. I appreciate the support. Again, Good Folks, Mad City, Life on the Edge in the FDNY and NYPD. All right. Thanks to Bill, as always, for his support, as we said earlier, of the Mike the New Haven podcast. Pardon me. My next guest has spent over 3 decades in law enforcement, rising through the ranks of the NYPD to ultimately become its chief of detectives. He started his career in 1983, a much different time for New York City, and quickly became immersed in some of the city's most challenging times. As we said, the 80s was not an easy time to be a cop in New York, from the crack cocaine epidemic to supervising major incidents and different precincts across Brooklyn and the Bronx. He led the NYPD's Detective Bureau through pivotal moments. As we said, he was a responder to the 9/11 attacks and was also key moments for the Organized Crime Control Bureau, as he'll discuss with me tonight. And since he retired from the NYPD in 2017, he's continued to share his expertise as a contributor to ABC News and as the narrator and consulting producer of New York Homicide. And like I said, someone I've been trying to get on for a while. Finally, he's here tonight. Former NYPD Chief of Detectives, Bob Boyce, joins the Mike the New Haven podcast. Chief, welcome. How are you?
Good to be here, Mike. How are you?
Good to have you. Like I said, long time coming. So before we get into your career, two-part question here. First, where did you grow up, and did you have any civil servants in your family?
So it's a very bland response from me. I grew up in Long Island,
Mhm.
nice area in Nassau County, and came to the city when I was 28. I became a cop, so a little bit older,
Mhm.
which helps a lot. I believe in it. A little more mature, a little more pointed, and a little more focused. And there was no one in my family at all who was a police officer. My father was a pilot for Pan American, and
Oh,
that's most people were in the airline business. in my family. So a little bit different, but I will tell you this: I came on, got sworn in January 3rd, 1983, and I loved the job from day one. So I was very fortunate.
Now, sometimes in terms of getting into civil service, it's a friend or a family member that says, take the test. You can always say no to the job, but just take the test just in case. You never know. Or it's television. A lot of guys of a certain era point to Emergency as being the show, or even MASH, or whatever the case is, as to why they ended up pursuing that career. What was it for you of the two scenarios, or even something else that made you say, all right, I'll give this a shot?
Sure. So being in a suburb of the city was a lot different than living up in the city. And whenever I went into the city, I was always I felt the buzz. I always enjoyed it, more so than where I was living in Nassau County. And there was nothing wrong with living, but it was quiet and sedate. Once I went to the city, everything changed. It was a lot more action, a lot more people, a lot of things going on, more cultures, all things. So every time I went in for whatever reason at that time, I was always enthralled by it. I came to a point in my life that I wanted to make a change. I was working in the restaurant business as a bartender. And at that point, I was going to open my own restaurant. What I said, a lot of my friends who would come to see me at the bar told me about the NYPD. So I thought I'd give it a shot. And they did.
And there you go. And the rest is history, as we mentioned in the introduction of you. So you get sworn in January of '83, get onto the streets later that summer. Specifically in June of '83, you start out. By then, we still have the neighborhood stabilization units. That went away, morphed into FTU later on in the '80s, close to the '90s. But in '83, it's still in existence. NSU too saw you start out in Manhattan South. So as a young guy, even then, you at 28 years old, you're more squared away than 21 or 22. But even then, rookie cop in Manhattan South, someone, as you just said, who loved the buzz of the city. How much fun was that to work in a neighborhood that back then was pretty hopping? It was rocking in '83.
It was an incredible time. And a lot of the time we spent in the parks, Union Square Park and Washington Square Park. And I was making arrests from day one. So it was usually low level stuff, but you got to know the land on time in the Union Square Park. Maybe I'm a month into it. I see a guy book, run away top speed. A little different run from running for a bus. I knew something was up, and I pursued him. And he just grabbed the bag. I made my first felony call. It was just all instinct at that time because you really don't know a lot at that point. So I really enjoyed my time. It was a short 6 months in Manhattan South, but it always left me with the impression that this is the center of the universe. And there's a lot going on. There's commuters, all kinds of cultures involved, a lot of housing developments too that I never had any dealing with until that time. So it was a lot of fun. And I became really dependent upon what we call FTOs, field training officers, that we had. They were not sergeants, they were detectives who showed you the ropes. And they were just tremendous people. And I learned a lot from them and carried with some of those things, those messages that they gave me way back when, for my entire career, about service and grit and being tough and understanding that things don't just fall into your laps. You have to work for an arrest. You have to work a case. Those things were all developed in those first 6 months. So it meant a lot. And after 6 months, I was transferred to another part of Manhattan, which I thought was a tremendous place to work as well.
And that was a 2-4 in January of '84. You were in SNU, Street Narcotics Enforcement, for a while.
I
And this is
was. I was very fortunate. After a year on patrol, and that was it. I was put in the SNU team. And back then, it almost immediately I went into it. Crack blew up. It really just took over the streets. Before that, we were making powder cocaine arrests, some marijuana arrests in a public on a private street. People lived there; they didn't want weed dealing going on in front of their house, which was happening. But also, it was powder cocaine. Once that time happened, really, I don't remember the exact time, but '85, something along those things, '86. I remember seeing the hand in hand go by and then going making the arrest in these vials of crack. We didn't know what it was until we sent it down to the lab, and they had to cut the product, to really test it. Once they did, they found it was crack cocaine, and the whole city changed almost within a couple of months. Everything changed.
you,
Crime was skyrocketing.
you saw it attack New York. You saw it attack LA at that time. It really just gripped the country, unfortunately, and became a major problem for any narcotics cop during that time. And you feel like it's a never ending cat and mouse game where you're taking these dealers off the street and their product. But again, not only cat and mouse, but a little bit of whack a mole too. Then the next dealer pops up with the next stash and the next stash and the next stash. So, it can get exhausting because you're chasing these guys, you're doing the best you can. But it was a battle back then, and dealers were going down. I mean, obviously they were in competition with each other. They're killing each other. Cops are getting hurt and even killed in the process trying to take them down. For you being involved in that as heavily as you were early on, What kept you motivated? What kept you in the game, so to speak?
It's a great question because it's your team. We were in a snoop team, and it was five of us, and we thought we were five against the world because there was a lot of drug dealing going on the 240 Upper West Side of Manhattan, and so we got along so well, and we knew exactly what we had to do it. Generally speaking, at that time, initially when we started out in snoop, you were in plain clothes, and within a month's time, I had a beard like down to here, and I was walking around. I had two years on the job when I was doing this. And just making arrests all over throughout the precinct. Then a scandal happened. We all had to shave our beards and go back into patrol. Not with us, but somewhere else in the city. But you still did your job. You still went forward. So that happened it was exhilarating. You would go down to central booking on a daisy chain with five or six perps on you by yourself and wait outside to get in. You're right. You felt like you were just making arrests. It wasn't really going anywhere. A lot of the arrests you were making for felony sale, BFL, it wasn't the same when you looked at a BFL. They looked at for another crime, like attempted murder. It wasn't the same. It was just there was so many coming in, the courts couldn't handle it, and so a lot of people were getting. We're really just turns out justice a lot like it is today, actually. And so it was just spinning you around, but you still had to be done. You still had to make those efforts to make sure the streets were as safe as you could.
We're talking with former NYPD detectives, chief of detectives rather, Bob Boyce here on the Mike the New Haven podcast. If you have a question for the chief, submit it in the chat and I'll highlight it at the appropriate time. Now, you alternated a little bit in 1987 between Manhattan South narcotics and Queens narcotics. So again, different boroughs with the same problem. Did you find that it was more prevalent in Manhattan than it was in Queens, or vice versa? Or was it just about even at that time?
It was a little different in Manhattan South. There was a lot of stuff in the parks in Manhattan, a lot of sales in the parks and around, and some housing developments, things like that. Not so much as in the streets. I remember in like on 8th Avenue in Manhattan, in Midtown, it was really rough. But one thing that stuck to me there that I brought back, and we'll get into it as I go on to become chief of D, we would have a federal day. My lieutenant at the time, when I was in Manhattan South Narco, was William L.A., who later became the chief of detectives, and as I did. And he would do federal days where we would take the prisoners we arrested and put them in the federal system. And at that point, if you wanted the federal system, you went into that federal system. You didn't come out. You took a long sentence and you went out west. So you didn't come back to New York. That stuck with me, how effective that was when we took down the street corner of crack sellers. Because you're right, it spawned violence, shootings, and all kinds of stuff. So that again, I came back to Manhattan, later on, and brought those same thoughts when I came back. But I remember I would, because I was a big guy, I would ghost the undercovers, meaning that I would make sure that they would get onto the set and go up the set without being bothered. So I would do that a lot too. My thing, I was from New Jersey, and we had to buy drugs for the day. That was my MO when I used to do that. So you're doing some undercover workers too, not buying so much as you are guarding the undercovers and helping them out, make sure they're okay. And you're also making the arrests. So I learned a lot at the time I was there. And at that point, went out from Eddie Byrne was murdered, and I went out to Queens narcotics after a certain amount of time.
I'll get to Byrne in a second because that's a major turning point in policing, not just in New York City, but across the country as a whole. But let's stay on Bill Ali for a second. I would have loved to have had him on the show. He's one of the many guys from the NYPD who we've lost to 9/11 illness in the years since the attack. And as you said, chief of detectives from, I think, 1997 until 2003 or so when he retired. A lot of guys have a lot of great stories about him, the Wah, as he was affectionately called. So when you look back on Bill, what are your favorite memories of him?
Tough guy, really, really hardcore cop. And you learned a lot from him, no nonsense. He would try to control the set. And I never seen that before. He would go up on an OP and send his undercovers in, and tell each one who to buy from, because he wanted to take the whole set down. Very organized man, very, very strict and disciplined type of guy. But you liked him because he didn't hold anything back. He told you right where you were with things. So I learned a lot from him. And I tell you what, I was in the hospital at Sloan Kettering with him when he was on the hospital bed. Afterwards, all he wanted to do was talk about police work. I was chief of detectives at the time we passed, and all he wanted to do was talk about policing. He would ask me about how come you hadn't made a collar and this. Yeah, I did a big case that was newsworthy at the time. So he never talked about his illness and his cancer that took his life, because he was just that guy. He was just a cop's cop. That's what he was. I really admired him greatly. Again, tough guy. You had to be on your toes at all time with William L. Lee. You better have answers to his questions.
Oh yeah, yeah. I've heard. I've heard. He was not easy that way, but for as firm as he was, again, guys loved him. Guys went to bat for him all the time. Borelli was that way too. Guys certainly went to bat for Borelli when he was the chief of detectives in the mid '90s before he retired. Now, I mentioned I would get to Byrne. This was a very, very tragic but unique time. We all wish it didn't happen, but at this time, you guys were already at a war with drug dealers. This kicked the war into overdrive. It was personal to begin with because you love these neighborhoods that you're patrolling. You get to know the good people in the neighborhoods. You want to fight for them. You want to do what's right for them. One of your own was killed and killed brutally in this war, which made it especially personal. Heading out to Queens after a time like that, where there's a lot of determination, but a lot of anger too. A lot of cops are pissed off about this murder and they want revenge. What was that like? Where you're angry for sure. How could you not be after something like this? But you got to be controlled. You don't want to, you don't want to fall into the drug dealer's hands. You want to make sure you get them off the street in a controlled manner, but send a message that we're not going to stand for this.
Well, Mike, it's hard not to think like that. You remember, this was an assassination. They come
Mhm.
up and shot Ed behind his back and blew his head off. It really did. And it was a tough time. And I became really close friends with his family, especially his brother Larry after that. Yeah, a couple of years later. And it really tore apart their family. And you put yourself in that position. I remember going to the wake and the funeral. It was by my house. At the time, I was living on Long Island. He only lived about maybe half a mile away. So in that area of Nassau is heavily NYPD. So he was the brethren. That can happen to him, it can happen to you. So here we have a drug organization now who takes it to the police like that. Now it's a war. Now you have to look at it differently. And it did at that point, because that at this point they poured hundreds of cops into the OCCB, narcotics division, and we saturated the area and we started taking down these drug gangs there, and we took a lot of them federally. Again, a lesson for me to be, and we'll talk about that later as I progress in my career, what the federal courts can do for you. They started taking these drug groups down. Fat Cat Nichols, the whole thing. Just trying to remember the guy who put the order out, for to kill Eddie. All these things, you look at these things, you say, wait a second, this is real time. I will tell you, when I went to Queens, I thought, when you think of Queens, you think of Shea Stadium, you think of nice neighborhoods, you don't think about it. And they were nice neighborhoods being overrun by these kids who grew up in these neighborhoods who are now making fortunes in selling drugs. So you had to understand that too. You knew where the sets were, you knew how to make the arrest, and you learned how to start talking to people. Exactly, who do you work for? What are you doing? And you do that through rapport. So you start getting your ground game going, your communications as a cop, how to speak to people, how to break them down, sit down, talk to them, and all of a sudden they'll tell you things that you didn't know before. I started learning that then at that point out in Queens.
And it was definitely a great education that would serve you well as your career progressed. So, 1988 is a pivotal year in your career. It's one of several turning points, but this was the first promotion. You make sergeant at the tail end of the year, 1988, December to be exact. And from Queens, you go out to Brooklyn, the 7-3, and you work in anti-crime for a while. Now, anti-crime, it exists in a little bit of a different form today as the community response team, but anti-crime was peak, I should say, plainclothes policing. Not to be confused with street crime. Street crime was citywide. Anti-crime was strictly for these precincts. So being involved in that, I mean, you'd had experience in plainclothes operations, of course, during your time previously in narcotics, but anti-crime was different in that you're not chasing calls on the radio. You really have to exhibit a lot of patience. For someone like you that clearly loves the action, how hard was that? Because sometimes hours could go by in certain days before something would happen.
Mike, it's funny you should say it, because there are some nights where you really have to work very hard. You're sitting on surveillances. I would sit on, let's say, Saratoga, Livonia for like an hour. If I knew there was a robbery the night before, I would check all my data. Even before this was well before CompStat. And you would grab 61s, you go out there, you get descriptions, and you would sit on a corner for hours. And then maybe the next night you make your collar for your robbery collar, and you had a gun. Other nights, you could see guys carrying guns. You talk to them, all of a sudden they run, and you chase them, you get a gun. And they were jumping into the car. So it's kind of like a feast or famine type of situation. I tell you what, DeVille, Brownsville, Brooklyn, I really feel for the people living there, because it's a tough life. It really is. And you really don't know how much they need you until you start working in that community. I went back twice to Brownsville. I was a sergeant there for 4 years in anti-crime. I got made a lieutenant and came back for 2 months before I went back to the detective bureau. And I'll explain that as I go later on. That's how much I liked it. I had a great team. In fact, some of the detectives that worked for me there worked for me at headquarters in my office. That's how close we got there. And it was. I'll tell you, um, it's a tough neighborhood to grow up in. There's a lot of housing developments there that people are on top of each other. And when gangs hit, it took that place harder than any place when the gangs hit New York City. So, and it became more and more violent. One of the things I looked at, I was there in 95. There was 200 murders between Brownsville 7-3 and East New York 7-5. 200 murders in 1 year. When I left in 2018, there were 20 in 2017, the year to date. So that's 10% what was. We really did something there. We really changed things. So that's important to understand. And it wasn't all about arrests. It was about a way of thinking, and so I was probably more than anything, one of the biggest things I'm proud of is that change in that community. Now it's slipped back a little bit because I still keep an eye on things. But it's not as bad as it was back in 95, in 94, 93. Those were tough times. But you got used to it. Back to the beard, back to the field jacket, still doing your same stuff, wearing a pair of sneakers, and you'd be running all night. Got shot at twice there, never hit in Brownsville. Kicked, punched, and stabbed there. So it's a tough neighborhood, to say the least. But again, when you go through it, I would tell anybody to still join the NYPD because you meet the best people in the world there. People sitting in sector cars next to you. So still friends with all those people that I was back then. So I'm happy I was there. And I really enjoyed the command, believe it or not, because when you came to work, the next thing you knew, it's time to go home. It went that fast, your tour. So I like that. And the same thing in 7-5.
I'll continue with your career in a moment. Just a quick question on your promotion to sergeant. But Steve Iorado's got a question in the chat just to go back to Eddie Byrne earlier. He says, was the killing of Eddie Byrne actually targeting him specifically, or could it have been any officer stationed in the RMP that night?
It's a great question. They knew that Eddie had to post a lot. They made a statement about him prior to that. We had that was documented on DD5. So they knew it was him. He took the post a lot. So it was against the police. It wasn't against Eddie. It was sending a message to the police, but it was through him. So they did some work prior to that to understand who it was going to be him that night. I believe that anyway to this day.
And I believe that too. Thanks, Steve, for submitting that question. Now, with a sergeant promotion, do you feel that what you had done earlier as a police officer guarding the undercovers helped prepare you in a way for what you would have to do as a sergeant? Do you feel like it made that transition a bit easier?
It does. Your experiences do come into play. I was very fortunate. I was promoted to sergeant with 5 years on. So I did have a vast amount of, I covered a lot of ground from patrol and then SNU and into narcotics division. So it helped me understand the module concept, the team concept. And that was important in anti-crime. And when I got to Brooklyn, you work in Manhattan, you work in different parts of the city in Queens, you really don't know what an urban crime is until you get to those parts of Brooklyn right there. It's a whole different attitude when you went to work each day.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's saying quite a bit. As you said, January of '94, you get to the 7-5. You give us 22 minutes, we'll give you a homicide. That was their slogan back then, and it's an unfortunate one. But as you said, 200 murders at one point in that neighborhood as a detective squad supervisor. And what's interesting there is it's a heavy ESU imprint there because a lot of the guys at the 7-5, you get the 7 truck right next door. It doesn't hurt to have them in your back pocket on heavy jobs. I don't know if you had him in your squad prior to him going to ESU. Did you have Joe Vigiano in your squad?
I did. Joe actually was in the RAM, which at the time was RIP. Robbery. He was in the RIP team. So I knew Joe. Yeah. So Joe's Joe. He was a tremendous guy. Joe had to be the first guy through the door. He was that kind of guy. He was just his personality. He was a larger than life guy. Big fellow too, by the way. And he was just a lot of fun to be around. We could actually trade Joe Vidge stories all night here because he had lots of them, and highly decorated guy. All of a sudden comes in one day and says, "I don't want to do this anymore. I want to go to the ESU." So we were all surprised about that, and actually went to the chief at the time to make the decision. He went to the chief of department at the time. Went to the chief Anamone, who I respect. I know you've had him on your show. Who I
Yes.
respect tremendously. And I think it went to Chief Anamone, and the chief Anamone said, "He wants to go to the ESU. Let him go." And because I think Chief Anamone had a background in the issue, and he went there. So we lost him in his SNU because he was a 7.5 homegrown cop. His wife worked there. Um,
Kathy, yep.
so of course, how can you not know Joe if you worked in the 7.5?
I wanted to bring him up there. I'm glad you mentioned him. And again, it was a interesting place to work just from the standpoint of the high homicide rate, but a big imprint was made there in terms of being able to get that murder rate down. So you mentioning that made me want to bring him up. But before I go into another transition in August of 1996, besides the work being done there, you have interesting detectives underneath you, and you want to make sure you play to their strengths. Obviously, they have investigative idiosyncrasies that has made them them. So tell me about, the balance between knowing when to send them in and knowing for their own benefit on certain cases when to pull them back.
I'm sorry, you're talking about undercover work with
Or as running a detective squad in the 7-5.
Oh, okay. So the squad there was famous. It still is. They do amazing work. We had an off-duty police officer killed in a robbery situation where his cousin was selling a car down by the pink houses, and so not to get too far into that case, I covered for ABC, and I knew they had the guy lined up. I knew they'd get this guy, and they did almost immediately because they know the area. Really, really talented detectives in a tough spot. When you catch a homicide, you're tied to it for several days, and sometimes you would live in the same suit and the same shirt, and you're ready to burn that shirt when you get home because you're doing so much in it. So in that respect, you will sit there and you watch them work, and you watch them understand, start breaking down motives, start talking to people in interview rooms, going out and doing canvases. All these things matter. The gut work of doing a homicide investigation, and they solve a lot of crime. I will tell you that if you look in the homicide room in the 7.5, I'm sure they still have it there. All the homicide cases they've solved. It's just folder after folder after folder, and you see what they're up against. You walk into a case with nothing, and all of a sudden now you start working it back. You identify the victim. You start talking to his family. You start now we grab video. It's very important to understand. I had a case in the 7.5 covered for ABC again, where a man that dismembered a female and left her body parts on the street.
Mhm.
And it turned out later on, they made the arrest, of course, within 24 hours, not 48, 24. And the case, I had worked the case on him back in 84 in the 2-4. He killed another woman. And then in 63, he had killed another woman and dismembered him. So we have this person, now he's a serial murderer, because of New York State kept paroling him. It made no sense at all. And they solved it very quickly, as did the detectives from the 2-4 way back in the 80s. So it's not the police department not working and solving these cases. It's sometimes the mistakes made in government that put these people out over and over and over again. You learn lessons even though you're well into your career and even past your career. That when's this going to end? When are we
Right.
going to protect the public?
Right. I mean, you see that even in instances where police officers were killed, as you were talking about that recently, the anniversary of Freddie Narvaez's murder, lieutenant that got killed responding to a call of a man stalking a woman. I believe that was in the Bronx, just past that happened in October of 1996. The guy that shot and killed him, who was later shot and killed himself by responding officers, had been paroled recently. You look at Sean Carrington's murder in 1998, same thing. There was the guy that killed him, who was killed by Sean's partner in return fire, was killed by, in that instance, Detective Carrington was killed by someone who had recently been paroled for murder in the 80s. So, it's an interesting point that you bring up, unfortunately, because bloodshed then, if not properly dealt with, leads to bloodshed in the future. And then what? So definitely a sad point there. Actually, before I get to August of 1996, David Burns via LinkedIn submits the following question. He wants to know, and David's a former guest of this show. Good to see you, my friend. Was the Palm Sunday homicide on your watch?
It's happened in the 7.5, but I was not there at that
Okay.
time. No, I did
All
not work the case. I know people who did,
right.
or fruition, but I didn't work the case. No.
All right. Thanks for your question, David. Appreciate you tuning in tonight, buddy. August of 1996, you make lieutenant, and you had two different detective squads, both in Brooklyn, 8-8 and the 7-9. More of the same, but it's different because in August of 96, we're in a better spot. Ray Kelly had started the decline in the early 90s when he was commissioned the first time. Bratton comes in. We get that 39% overall crime drop. Now, by August of 96, he's not there anymore. Howard Safer is. And Howard Safer, former guest of this show, miss him very much. He continued that crime decline too. So it's a good time to be a New York City police officer because the numbers are still up there, but they're going down from 2,000 to 1,000 by the end of the 90s. I think it was in the 600s. So tell me about the work that was being done at that time where the pendulum has swung, proactive policing is being encouraged.
It is. And so let's start with the 88 Detective Squad. I went there. I was a sergeant in the 7-5 squad. When I got promoted lieutenant, I went for a short time back to the 7-3 at my choice. And then they picked me up for the 88 squad. So busy squad, but not overly so. Beautiful part. I tell you what, Fort Greene is one of the nicest parts of Brooklyn by far. But you had some work. You had the Myrtle Avenue stuff, and you had some stuff on Fulton Street that you had to address. I also had a bombing there, a terrorist bombing there. We actually prevented it from happening. This is the 88 squad did. So I'm very happy with that. It's first look I had at terrorism, because we grabbed the guys, and ESU pulled them out of a building, actually shot them. And so first time I got a look at terrorism, I went to KCH, Kings County Hospital, and spoke to them there. It was an interesting time. Shortly thereafter, I was sent to the 7-9 squad. And usually it's Comstat. I don't know, you're familiar with the
Yes.
with Comstat. You make your bones there all the time. You have one bad day, and it takes you about a year to recover. However, I kind of picked it up, and I was fortunate. I think it was probably the most important thing in my career is that when I went to Comstat, I was already prepared and ready to present. So went to the 7-9, and then worked really hard. 7-9 is not what it is now, but still, it was a lot busier then. Now you see these beautiful, but it always was a nice precinct with beautiful brownstones. These coffee shops. It was not that then. It was a little bit different, a little bit more Wild West. So tough times. You worked your cases, and you did well, and you also honed your craft. And again, I met some tremendous detectives along the way there, and it was fun to lead them. It really was, and we counted on them. And you were expected to make the arrest on a shooting and a homicide, and we did more often than not. So I had some very big cases there when I was there, and really developed a really strong appetite for the detective bureau. Really enjoyed detectives, understood them, respected them, and treated them with as much respect as I could, being their boss.
Now, I want to stay on that prevented terrorist bombing for a second because you just jogged my memory. I did a whole show on it as part of the Tales from the Boom Room series. So, members of ESU and the bomb squad, 7 Truck and 8 Truck, and Rich Teamsma, the late Rich Teamsma, who passed away from 9/11 cancer a little while ago, and Paul Yerkew from the bomb squad, former ESU cops in their own right, went to the house that night where 2 Hamas guys, I believe, were going to set off that bomb the next morning and the Atlantic Avenue subway, if I'm not mistaken. Freddie Manzolillo, who was in arson explosion at the time, a sergeant, was there as well. So just besides what you mentioned earlier, when you look back on that job and what would follow in later years, which we'll talk about in depth as we get there, tell me about your recollections from, again, a crazy job that all things considered ended quite well. ESU and the bomb squad did a great job that night.
And so did the NH precinct detectives too, by the way.
And they did too, yes.
So what it was, and listen, I love ESU guys. No slap to them. We set the whole thing up for them to hit the door. And when they did, I remember going out there. One individual walks into the precinct, says they're trying to, grabs 2 MTA cops and says this is going to blow up the station tomorrow. MTA brings them to the 88. 88 brings them up to the squad, and we start breaking them down. Now I'm at home. I come in, and we start talking to this guy. You can see almost immediately this man was genuine. And the persons he talked about, the 2 others, there was 3 people living in an apartment. They hated America. They couldn't stand it. They wanted to do something. They were following the blind sheik at the time and his messages. And you saw this fellow dressed nicely with a nice pair of slacks and silk shirt. He loved America. He goes, I don't want to die, and I want to stay in America. I don't believe in any of that stuff. He gave us the apartment, actually told us where the bag was, a black bag with the bombs in, with the homemade IEDs in. All right. So we had all that. I think the captain was Ralph Pasculo that night.
Yes.
Ralph. And wonderful man. And I remember in the 88 squad saying, this is where the black satchel is. This is where the bombs are. If they go for that, they're going to set up the bombs. Because this is the best thing I can give you. And so I remember we were at that time on Atlantic Avenue. We were in Flatbush. I forget exactly where it was. We were getting people out of the apartments as much as we can, because if that blows, that's going to blow. And it's quiet. We hit that door at like 4 o'clock in the morning. So it was unusual. And I remember I'm sitting in the street waiting for it to go down. I had my rain jacket on from narcotics. And I'm sitting there, and guy walks up to use the mayor's office. We just woke up Mayor Giuliani, just so you know. And I'm thinking, geez, I hope this isn't BS. I hope this actually is a bomb here because I just woke the mayor up. And then I hear the machine guns go off. And I knew we had something. And so at ESU brought the perps out into the street. And as with most perps, there's one real bad guy and one real soft guy. And that's exactly what this was.
Yep.
So soft guy's going to tell me everything. Bad guy's not going to tell me nothing. So I jump in the bus with the ambulance to the hospital and we had a Fed there too. I don't know, FBI guy came out of nowhere. We put him in with another guy. So we went to the hospital, and he gave up the entire event to us, which we called. My detective called. What's Yerku's first name?
Paul.
Paul, who was on the scene with the bag at the time, and we explained everything to him, how it was rigged. And I don't want to go into it right now because I don't want to give information out to anybody. But there were pipe bombs with 9-inch nails as anti-personnel devices. Was going to go out of shrapnel, and they were going to blow up the Flatbush Aero Station. Mistakenly think they were killing a lot of Jewish people. If you know Brooklyn, there's not a lot of Jewish people right there. We have plenty of Jewish people in Brooklyn, but not there. So their information was wrong, and they were kind of haphazard in a lot of things. And so we made the arrest within the next day in the 8-8 squad, and I'm exhausted by this time, of course, because you go around the clock and you're 100 miles an hour. JTTF walks in, we're taking the case. It's yours. I want to do this. I go back to my bad guys on the street. I want nothing to do with this nonsense because these guys were really crazy. These terrorists taught me a lesson going forward that the feds have protocols for that, and I'm fine with that. But then you don't stop. I went to the bomb squad and I said, "Show me the bomb thing." And the lieutenant at the time didn't want to show it to me. He used my professionalism to get him to see what those bombs look like because I really wanted to see it. Mm-hmm. See how good that this guy told us he was. Paul was looking at, Yurko was looking at, and he showed me how they were wired and they were schemed, and what was the detonation device and how that got. I really wanted to see that, even though it was not my case at that point. And he showed me. And he showed me how it was done. And that stayed with me going forward. The next week they transferred to the 7-9 squad. That was my time in the time of the 8-8.
What a way to go out, though! And I never forget.
Listen, I'm still tight. I still love that.
I can see why, and I'll never forget Richie telling me, God, I miss Richie. Another great one we lost too soon. But he's like, when he went to the precinct that night with Paul, because they had been partners on patrol, partners in ESU, partners in the bomb squad as well. He's like to the guy, all right, draw me a picture of what you saw. This part's kind of humorous. He says to me, I'll never forget, he's like, Mike, he couldn't have drawn a more accurate picture of a pipe bomb if he tried. So that's when they knew, yeah, this was real. And thankfully, the only people that got hurt that night were the bad guys, and everything ended well, all things considered. Next week is the 7-9, so you stay in Brooklyn. And again, more work to be done.
That's right. Yeah.
Yep. So tell me about the work that was being done there at the time and the area that it covers for those who may not know.
This is Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. It's the western part of Bed-Stuy, because that's on the other side is the A1, and that's still Bed-Stuy. But it was on Tompkins Avenue. You had a lot of developments there at the time that were kind of at odds with each other. So you had a lot of murders. A lot of it was over drug deals and drug stops like that. I really did a lot of presentations in Comstat, where so much so that I think I was up at least twice a month talking in front of Chief Anamone and everybody else. So what do? You hone your craft at that point. You're ready for anything. And I always thought, and I still think that when I tell people at Comstat, when I do presentations in the NYPD training thing, no one should know your precinct or your shop or your squad better than you. So understand what they're going to ask you, but also know they don't know as much as you do. And you might as well tell them when you're up there. You're going to eat the clock. You're going to tell them stuff, and you're going to tell them things that they don't know. I remember telling Chief Anamone one time, I found a guy on the photo manager thing, because all we did was put in his date of birth. People lie to you. When they get shot, they have warrants. They don't want to go to jail. So this guy got shot, and I remember telling him, he gave us they always give you the right birthday, but they give you the wrong name. So if you run the birthday, this picture popped. We knew who he was immediately. We knew we had a warrant, and we were able to close the case. He was able to give us the shooter because of technology that headquarters was giving us that we didn't have before. So it was an exciting time to understand this unfolding stuff. Like there was systems, cars, computer assisted robbery systems. I tell you what, it was the best information I could find from the street. Remember how when you start out in the 80s, you go down and you do a report and you hand it in. I think it was a UF90. You hand it in and you wait for someone to come out maybe a week or so to send you the information you need. It was so slow. Now it was coming out really fast on a land computer. And here we are in the 90s now. And we're expediting our cases. and we're closing things out much faster, helping us reduce crime by taking the shooter off the street.
And I imagine by the time you made captain in the fall of 1998, and granted, there's still more work to be done, you got to look around and say to yourself, man, from when I started in '83 to where we are now, we've really cleaned this place up. This is amazing.
Mike, it's almost like a drug. Crime reduction. You want to keep going. You don't want to stop.
Right.
And so we'll talk later about the end of my time and where we were when I left in 2018. It is, and you want to know what the next big push is, how you can drive crime down even lower. And the police only have a role in driving crime down. There's a whole lot of other factors, social factors go in. These kids, you see, they're walking around in the middle of the night. It's a school night. What are they doing out there? And you understand the way of things. That you're never going to save that kid because he's already gone. But you want to save maybe his brother or whatever the case may be. Keep them off the street. Go take them home to the parents. Tell the parents, listen, you can't have this. So we're going to call ACS and if you BCW, whatever it was at the time. You can't have this kid walking around that. I don't care if you lock the door and put the chain on it. You can't let him out of the house. And you would do stuff like that. You would do stuff because it was the right thing to do. And again, at that time, you would still see that same woman on a canvas on the shooting, and now she trusted you. And you would talk to her, and she would tell you which way is up. So those are the things you learn by working your precinct. I always liked working a precinct. Narcotics was great, but it was a broad application. SNU was on that precinct alone. I always liked working the precinct concept, and it helped me when I became a precinct commander going forward from there.
Now, that would happen in September of 2000. Now, to this point, you had been a Queens cop, you had been a Manhattan cop, you had been a Brooklyn cop. You had not been a Bronx cop. So now you're getting a flavor of an entirely different borough. Getting to the 4-0 in the late summer, early fall of 2000. How much of I don't want to say culture shock. I don't think that's the right word, but how much of a shift was that for you mentally? Because each borough has their own way of doing things on either side of the aisle, FD and PD. What was it like finally getting a taste of the Bronx? So, I don't want to say late into your career, but at the midway point of your career.
Yeah, it was. It was 2000 when I got the shop. I had 3 years to go. I was leaving on my 20. I had 17 years on. So before that, I was also the XO of the 7.5, back to the 7.5. I worked for Anthony Izzo there, and we had a really strong crime reduction there. I learned a lot about the patrol side because remember, I was off patrol for a while. I was doing detective work. So now I'm a captain. I'm an XO in the 7.5, and we had a really strong year there. And I was sent to the 4.0. At that point, Commissioner Kirk had taken over the police department.
Yes.
And I went up there with a package from Brooklyn North into the Bronx. And I knew they're called parachutes now, Mike. When you go in from outside and you take a command in a different borough, you're not well liked. You took someone's spot. There was waiting to get that spot. I understand it completely. I understand that, because it happened to me in Brooklyn North. I was supposed to get a different spot and I didn't get it. So I was angry about it. But that's all right. So you go into the 4.0 and you really don't know the lay of the land. So you start building your team really quickly. So I remember the people that we put together. I had this, one of my lieutenants, my special ops lieutenant, walked in my first day there. He goes, I'm leaving. I'm retiring. And the other one walked in, another special projects where he goes, I'm going to the borough. I'm leaving. Something I said. All of a sudden they're leaving. And so I said, it's the way things are, I guess. And so with that, the next day, I wondered who I'm going to pick. In comes Joe Dowling. Ended up he's a retired chief on our job. And from the police department, he was lieutenant. He was my crime sergeant in 7.9 with a stroke of luck. Guess what, Joe? You're now my special ops guy. And Joe brings a lot to the job. Brings intensity, smarts, experience. So we started building a team almost immediately in a place that I knew nothing about. I did know it was tough. It had a lot of housing developments. It had a really busy 2 main streets, 149th Street and 138th Street. And I had to win those blocks, 149 during the day. There was a lot of heroin being sold there, and 130 and 138th Street at night because there was a lot of crime, a lot of robberies there. So you learn how to see what your tough spots are immediately, and you start figuring things out. And so building the team, getting the cops on your side. And I remember them saying to me, well, this is a busy command. So I just came from the 7.5. So I understand. Busy.
I know busy, he said.
I know busy. It's fine. And I tell you, I really like the Bronx. I really liked working there. I liked a lot of it. And I noticed that the people the folks on the street were really friendly to cops. And that wasn't the way it was in Brooklyn. It was a little bit standoffish. In the Bronx, it was wholly different. And people who would go from from Brooklyn to the Bronx would understand that. These folks are really nice people. They're living in a tough environment. Someone, one of the politicians there told me that there was the poorest, poorest, I forget what it said, part of the nation, poorest congressional district in the nation.
Mhm.
And I was shocked by that. I was, wow, it's rough here. And it was. And it was. So I learned a lot in the 2 years I was there. And that happened in the middle of 911. 9/11.
Before I get to 9/11, there's a couple guys. Well, I'll touch on it right now. There's a couple guys that I, one of which I know you knew because he came on the job with him, but the other one he was in the 4-0 and respond. He was retiring that morning. That's John Perry. I don't know if you knew John well at all, but if you did, any memories of John?
John was one of my cops in 4-0. And John was a different cat. He was a tall guy. He was an athletic guy, swimmer, runner, spoke 5 languages. He was an attorney. He was just a jack of all trades. And what a nice disposition he was. And so something happened. He ended up in a 4-0. I forget what it was, from headquarters. And I would talk to him. I talked to a lot of my cops and he was really interesting, John. And John was a member of the ACLU. He told everybody was, and that doesn't sit well with a lot of people in law enforcement. And so I said, John, man, I would tune that down a little, buddy. And he was like, no, but it doesn't matter to me. I'm going to keep saying it. I believe it. Sorry, John, cool. So he came into me like a couple of days before 911. He said, listen, boss, I'm leaving. I said, where are you going? He goes, I got a job in the private sector with a firm, with a law firm. John, it's great. Congratulations. You sure you want to leave this? Because I know he was an adventurer. He really wasn't one of those adventurous types. He'd go over to Europe and live a while in different policing things. And he said, it's so against your nature, John. You're like this guy. He swam I think the Hudson River in a race. He was a runner. He was an actor. I said, you're all
Yeah.
over that place, man. What do you know? And he goes, no, I really want to do this. I guess I have to grow up. I said, I got to do a life change, and I'm looking to make a change. Well, God bless. Good luck. And if I said, you have anything for me, just call me. And then he went down to headquarters that day, and he came in to say goodbye. I didn't have time to speak to him. It burns me to this day. I didn't have time to spend any time with him. So he shook his hand, John, good luck and best in life. And that was it. He wanted to talk some more. He just didn't have the time. It was 4 hours to make a command. And then he goes down there and he responds. And he's killed in there. And he's right next to an individual who I knew very well. And that person called me. And I don't want to give you his name because he's involved with a lot of things in Manhattan right now. A lot of things. And he says, Bobby, did you see John? Have you seen John? I said, no. He goes, I was down there with him when the building collapsed. So we went to John's house. He lived in Manhattan. We knocked on the door. We took forced entry to the door. He wasn't there. So we know he was gone at that point. We drove out to see his mom and dad out in Seaford, Long Island. And we told them, we don't think John's around. Oh, yeah. We found his body in March, almost intact. It was scary. Like he was almost intact, and the building had collapsed around him. He was not burned up at all. It was like a pallor on him, and then we carried his body out in March of 2002. So tough times. He was a genius guy. He was a very interesting man. And Pat Perry, his mom, and I became very close for a while.
You knew Danny Richards too from the Bomb Squad. You came on the job with Danny. Danny was in your academy class, and he went to the Bomb Squad in 1986. That's where he stayed, and that's where he responded from on 9/11, and he died in the collapse of the North Tower. I don't know if you kept in touch with Danny throughout your respective careers, but just being in the academy with him, what do you remember about Danny?
So Mike, he came from a part of Long Island too, close to me, and we used to talk on the train on the way in. And he told me what he was going to do. He was going to go into the Bomb Squad because he had that experience in the service.
Yeah,
and
he's Army Ranger.
really squared away dude, man. I'll tell you, right? He looks so bad like an Army Ranger. That's him. That's that guy. And he had munitions expertise from his time in service. He said, I'm going to do 3 in the street, go into the squad. That's exactly what we did. Exactly what we did. He was friends with another guy in the Bomb Squad, I know. And so
Danny McNally?
No,
No.
George's name will come to me in a minute. So I knew a couple guys, and they worked out at the 6th precinct. And they were a great bunch down there. So Danny was exactly that had the military bearing that we all look at. Perfect clothes, everything, boom, just right down to the last detail. Wonderful man.
Thanks for opening up about John and Danny. I know, like I said, I wanted to see if you knew John. I'm glad you did. And I know you knew Danny because I remember you commenting such. And yeah, as I've heard the same thing about him. Very squared away guy, very meticulous, very disciplined, and that's the kind of cop you want in a unit like the bomb squad. He did very well for himself in the bomb squad. He saved a lot of people on that fateful morning, as did John, as did Joe, who responded with two truck ESU that morning with Mike Curtin
It
and
was
John
combination,
Delara.
if I can interject one thing.
Yeah,
When I came on in '83, they kept us for a couple of days on 7th Avenue at a high school there for swearing in. And I sat right next to a guy, and we became friends. And we same height and weight, same everything in Long Island. We had a lot in common. And we were going out to lunch for a couple of days together. Became friends with him. After that, I never seen him again. His name was Tommy Lango.
ah,
Again, ESU guy. And I had never seen Tom after. The job is very big. And
yeah.
once you get separated from someone, you may never see that person again because the job is so vast. So I remember Tommy like still today, and we went out to lunch. His brother showed up, who was also lost in 9/11,
Pete,
to join us for lunch. Strange, strange.
yeah. Pete was in Squad 252 FDNY, and Tommy, of course, he started out on patrol. I think he worked in Brooklyn for a little bit, and then he went to Queens. When he joined emergency service in 1991, he was in Truck 10. He was a Truck 10 guy from 91 up until the end. Yeah, him and his brother, just tremendous people and tremendous assets to both the
Great
police
people.
force and the fire service as well. Thank you for opening up about them. A year after the tragedy, September 2002, another turning point. You go back to Brooklyn in the 6-7, promoted to inspector around this time. You stay there for a few years, and then it comes October of 2006, where you're commanding officer of the citywide gang division. You're a deputy chief now. So, gangs from what they were when you started are dramatically different to what they were in 2006. But then again, still work to be done. Where were we in 2006 in terms of the biggest threats and in terms of the gangs with the largest operations throughout the city? And what was your goal to mitigate those problems?
So let's break it down a little bit.
Hmm.
When I go to Brooklyn, it's in 2002.
Hmm.
I'm a CO of 6-7, probably the best precinct I've ever worked in anywhere. Um, the men and women there are just incredible. So I spent 4 years. I was there longer than I was in high school. But I tell you what, I don't want to leave. And they had a big gang problem there. And I understood there was a change now. The Bloods and Crip culture came in, but it didn't really. It came down to neighborhoods. They came to what we used to call pocket crews at the time. It was smaller gangs, so that they would ally themselves with Bloods or Crips, but in that part of Brooklyn it was mostly Crips in the 6-7. Where in Brownsville it was mostly Bloods, and you had to make sure those people never met. All right, because at the time there was a lot of violence, but a lot of the crews came down to neighborhoods, and in Brownsville as well as in many spots in 6-7, 53rd Street was a big problem for me. In Brownsville and other parts there, these little pocket crews were fighting with each other for nothing more than just it wasn't about drugs at that point. It was more about turf and who's stronger, who's bigger and tougher. So you learn that. So 4 years there, and I learned we have a big celebration there every year for Labor Day. It's called Juve, and I did 4 Juves there. And it's tough times there too, and we were able to get that turned around too through some strategies and things we employed. One year I had 10 people shot, and the next year we had one. And the year after that, we had one. And one year we took 20 guns off the street. So you're faced with these problems as a precinct commander, and it's up to you to solve them. It's not, no one's going to help you from the borough, or really so. No one's going to help you from downtown. It's up to you. You're that spot. You're that face of the NYPD in that community, and you have to come up and rally your men and women to come up with initiatives to slow that down, which we did. So I'm probably as proud as anything in my time in 6-7. With that, Joe Esposito called me, chief of the department. He says, "Bob, you moving?" I said, "Where am I moving to?" He goes, "You're taking over gang." I said, "Oh, I'm good here. I can do another couple years." He goes, "No." He goes, "You're leaving, whether you like it or not." So I went. You always do what Espo says. And so I went to the gang division, and I saw it was 120 people. We should have had 420 people because there was that many gangs coming across the city. It was the new crack. Um, Great chief Jimmy Secreto told me that. He says, "You got the new crack. Good luck. It's gangs." He was right. These kids were shooting each other left and right, and still are to a
Yeah,
certain extent. Still are,
sadly. Yeah.
sadly. And there's no recourse. This is all they care about is the gang. And you would bring them in, you would arrest them, and you try to talk to them, and you really couldn't. They were so vapid and so plugged into the gangs. So we had that. And a couple things, my takeaways from the gang division was we were running cases out of upstate prisons where gang members were going. We put them away for murder, but they were still not calling out shots back in their neighborhood on murders. So, usually they'd send someone up to talk to the gang leader, usually a young lady, and she would tell him what's going on. He'd send a hit back to that, to that team. This guy's got to get hit because he's not whatever, or it's another gang, whatever the case may be. They were still running their gangs from upstate prison. So that took that away too. I wanted to open some federal task forces and I couldn't. I was told no. So I wasn't happy about that. So fast forward that I did 4 years there. And I tell you what, some great work done in the early years with gangs. And it's still, the motive of gang shootings was growing at that time. It was lessening with drugs and growing into gang-related shootings. Motives are important. It's how you write your strategies, and you look to see where it's happening, what you're going to do about it. And then if you can plug in as many resources as you can, you talk to specifically assigned gang DAs to help you when you got a case and you have somebody. So this was important to me at the time. Did 4 years there, and did a citywide op. Each borough had a gang team.
You mentioned Espo. I wanted to mention Ray Kelly here too, because he's back for his second go around as commissioner, which was his longest stint. I don't think anybody will ever hold the spot as long as he did, 12 years. You'll probably never see that again. And counterterrorism was his baby, but he still wanted to keep an eye on everything that was going on in the department. I think that was his military bearing. I know he was a Marine in Vietnam, so that's kind of what was his nature as police commissioner as well. What was he like in briefings about your cases whenever you had the opportunity to brief him? And what was he like in general to work for?
I thought he was tremendous. He's a Marine. Understand that when you go in, you're going to be pointed. You're going to get your message across, and you're going to punctuate it with facts. So I did a lot of presentations to Commissioner Kelly. By the way, he phoned me 4 times. I love the man. All right. So it's
No,
not.
I do too.
So and it's one of those things. And so, but today he hasn't lost a beat at all. He's the same guy. He was able to run this department. He understood the optics. Our successes, our optics mattered to the people. So at that point, I worked, did a lot of police shooting presentations to him. Always, boom, 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 always a matter of fact, where is this going? What does it look like? Did we do anything wrong in this? Is there something bad with this shooting that I need to know about? And that's where it was with him. Very straightforward guy. And Joe Espo was his chief of department.
And Joe Esposito, you'll never see a guy hold that spot as long as he did from 2000 to 2013. There was another guy who, again,
Oh, the one better, you'll never see another Joe Esposito.
No, yeah, absolutely. Another guy, again, we lost way too soon because 9/11 illness just keeps taking all these great ones from us, and he's another one it took from us. But his legacy lives on, and he was a tremendous, tremendous officer. He was, as they say, real police, and there's not a higher compliment I think a cop can get, but he deserves it, and he's missed. Um, Commander as an assistant chief of the Detective Bureau in the Bronx, also later on Detective Bureau in Manhattan, and this is leading you up towards the big moment in March of 2014, which we'll get to in a second. But just to go back a second, we'll break it down here too. Being back in the Bronx for a little while, August of 2010, being back in Manhattan for a little while before the bigger promotion that would come later. Tell me about seeing things on an entirely different level. You had been a precinct commander in the Bronx. Now you're commanding an entire bureau of detectives just in that borough alone. So you get there, you had 3 years there. What did you most enjoy about that assignment?
Just about everything. Those people I met there, I brought with me for the rest of my career. A lot of the people that my inner core was in the Bronx. I thought the detectives they were tremendous. Very, very mistreated by the police department. And when I say that, nobody had any special assignment money. Nobody had very few first and second grade promotions there. A lot of the bosses were not promoted special assignment or commander detective squad. A little angry, to be honest with you. And I saw the caseload was crushing them. So at the time, someone called me up at my first day there and said, "Good luck. You just went to NYPD Siberia, and your career will end there." Someone who I actually worked for a couple of years, and I was a little angry with that too. I said, I started looking at the cases. I said, "Listen, we got to get." I called Chief Pulaski up at the time, who sent me up there. I said, "Chief," I said, "I need detectives here." I said, "There's the crush here. They're not going to be able to work here with all these cases." He says, "All right." He goes, "Start doing interviews." So he promised me, I think, 60 or 70 brand new white shields into the squads. And it changed everything because I interviewed each one. At the time, telephone thefts were very big. At the time when the iPhone was out, the first Apples were out. And I don't want to go too far into that, but there was some big time casework there that we were able to get that turned around that I brought down to Comstat that what the rest of the city wasn't doing. Some of the things these detectives were telling me and what we were brokering, were no one was doing in the city, but we were, which was really important to share that with the rest of the city. So I was really proud of my time in the detectives, and I was shocked he gave me 2 stars there, to be honest with you. When Commissioner Kelly called me up and said, "Give me a second star." But loved the place, and again, back to the boogie down. I liked it very much, and we had I was there 3+ years, really strong times, and they saw the more arrests we made, the more detectives we had, you wouldn't get burned out. You can make your arrests on big cases. You brought out all this talent from patrol and turned them into detectives. And some of those people right now are all first graders and big time bosses in the detective bureau. There was that much talent there. And here's a place where, like, I thought we were stuck in the '60s. They were wearing shoulder holsters and ankle boots. I said, "Oh, guys, come on, let's get with the program." And so, and we did. And it's like I tell you, I put Bronx homicide above everybody in the police department. That's how good they were. 4-4 squad, and you keep 4-7 squad. So many, and I'm not going to stop there. There's a whole bunch there. 4-0. They're tremendous squads. They knew everybody, every bad guy in the place. And I would do what they call Boyce stats. I'd bring them in and go through their casework at least once a week. And you learn about your sergeants. You learn about the detectives working for you. So it was a very positive experience to me. It was back, to the detective bureau because gang was in OCCB. It was back to the detective bureau. So it was fun doing that. And I saw, which we didn't have we had the electronic case management system. That wasn't there when I was running the 7-9 squad and working the 7-5 squad. So now I could read all the cases in one sitting, in front of my typewriter, in front of my computer. And I was astounded by it, how good it was, how good a management tool was. So that helped a lot too. So that's then things were changing. There was a new mayor and a new police commissioner.
And we'll touch on that momentarily, but just briefly, I don't know if you remember him, Richie Ficken, former guest of the show. He says was in the 7-3 RIP in '93 when the chief was the crime sergeant. So he sends his regards. Richie, a former street crime cop.
Good man.
Yep, yeah, very good guy. Fellow Ranger fan. Was on this show previously I think a couple of years ago. Good to hear from you as always, Richie. Thanks for tuning in tonight. So we'll get right to it. March of 2014, Phil Pulaski had definitely, say what you will about him. Some people are fans of his, some people aren't. But regardless of that, he made his print on the Detective Bureau. Another very meticulous guy who ran it like a tight ship, but he doesn't stick around. He leaves in 2014. Bratton wants to, naturally, as any new police commissioner does, have his own people there. So he taps you to be the chief of detectives. This is a legendary position in the NYPD amongst many, and you think of the greats that have held it. We talked about Bill Ali. We talked about Joe Borelli. We've talked about quite a few other people over the years who've had this spot. And now it's you. And not only are you someone that's so invested in the NYPD in terms of your cops, you're clearly someone who's invested in it from the history of the department as well. So as someone who had been a 30+ year veteran by that point of the department, and as someone who is a student of the history of the department, tell me about what that moment meant to you.
So it's something you never thought you'd reach at all, even though I was moving pretty well. I was moving pretty well around the job. I picked up the 2nd star, went to Manhattan. Chief of Manhattan Detectives is no small job either, Mike. And just everything was going really well. And I really liked being Chief of Manhattan Detectives, by the way, as well as all the other spots. But Manhattan Detectives, that was prime, the center of the universe. So when Bill Bratton came in, Commissioner Bratton came in, everybody submitted their resumes. And I think my resume was like 3 or 4 pages. He's never going to read this, but he wanted detail. So I pointed out everywhere I went in my career, what I did, how many medals I had, my education was, all these things, So I send it in, and I get a call from John Miller, the great John Miller, the deputy commissioner at the time, and he says, "Let's go have dinner." So I said, "Okay, let's go." So we go have dinner with John, and we're talking. And I figure he's interviewing me because he's very close to the boss. And so we're having a great time at dinner, talk and laugh and talk about the And this man is brilliant. And so he goes, all right, dinner's over. Let's go meet Bratton. So we go to another restaurant, near East on the Upper East Side. And in the back is the man, Bill Bratton. And at that point, we have a short conversation. And he says to me, pointedly, my takeaway from that meeting was, I don't talk about crime to the press. You are. Can you do that? So she goes, I can do it. He goes, well, how do I know that? So I've already done it. So I've done press conferences before. And I've done 22 years of Compton. I'm used to podium. It's not a big deal. So he hired me that night. And then the rest, I swore I'd never disappoint him. I told him that, and I never did. And rallying people together to the Bureau. And the Bureau changed in my 4 years, because he knew I only had 4 years left, because until I aged out, he knew that. And I told him that too. I said, listen, I can give you 4 years. And so, and then I have to leave, by law. So he goes, that's all I want is 4 years. So he goes, that's great. So that's what we did. We walked away with a handshake, and I got the job that night. And then Phil was gone. Phil retired maybe a day after that. And then I assumed his responsibilities until I was sworn in on St. Patrick's Day in 2014, which I
So,
requested, by the way.
so it's a seminal moment in your career, easily the defining moment in your career as well. But now comes the standpoint of, okay, here's what I want to do. Again, crime-wise, we're in a great spot in 2014 in New York City. Things are moving well. Ray Kelly's years were good years. Bill Bratton's back, and the crime decline continued under him. But there's short-term goals and there's long-term goals. And you only got 4 years, so you want to make those goals happen in that span. So tell me about your mental list or even written down list of, okay, here's what I want in the short term to accomplish. Here's what I want in the long term to accomplish, and how you went about accomplishing it.
So here's the thing with gangs. We'll start with them.
Mhm.
I told you back then when I had a gang division, I wanted federal task forces. Why did I want that? Well, the reason is that they were calling out hits from their jail cells upstate on prison cell blocks. They can't have that. All right. So if we now take them into the federal system, we're going to put them out in places like Sandstone, Minnesota, where they're going to just wither. They'll have no contact. They're completely severed from their gang. They won't be doing anything because no one's going out there to visit them. So my plan was to start federal task forces, all right, and other task forces to hit the gang thing as hard as I could. The number one motive in 2014 for shootings was gang. So I'm back to thinking of the gangs, even though I knew them well from Bronx and Manhattan. And they're in every development in the city. And the problem with gangs is that the kid doesn't get a chance to grow up. They've immediately taken into the gang. He's in a life of crime. I mean, this is how bad it is. And that's all they know. That's all they know. They leave their own family. They don't care about their own family. And they're attached to this gang family. So that has to change. So I went to Bill Bratton. I said, would you mind if I open up a task force with the FBI on gangs? And his Boston drawl said, Bob, I don't care what you do. You just bring crime down. He goes, open as many as you want. And I did. And I did. So that and my team, my XO was Mike Baldessano, was still on the job. Tremendous chief. And he said, Mike, let's get it done. And so we went to the FBI and we started opening these task forces up. Right? And they were very, very great partners, the FBI. So we opened up the Safe Streets Task Force. At that juncture, Commissioner Bratton grabbed me. He goes, Bob, I want a hybrid to attack the gangs too. I said, what are you talking about? He goes, you have all these silos of bureaus here. You got Detective Bureau, you got OCCB, you got Patrol. How come you're not all on the same sheet? Well, they're all sending different bosses. Well, he goes, give me a hybrid that you're in charge. So we came up with the gun violence suppression team, which is probably one of the most successful divisions we have in the police department. And they've been rewarded with all the accolades and because they deserve it. They're tremendous. Go hit the gangs. But this time, you do so with an investigative bent. All right. And you go to where they're talking. And where are they talking? On social media. Where are they bragging? Where are they threatening? Where are they doing all these things? And what's the nexus with hip hop as well? Because that's there too. So I want people who understand that everybody's in soft clothes, which means no more suits. And we'll find spots for you and you start working these things down. So then we went about looking for the best people in the city for these spots, which we did. And we had teams. We had a team that would select the best cops for these things, best investigators, and put them in the gang business, which we did. It paid dividends in 2016 and 2017. We took over 115 gangs down in that time frame. Now, with it changed everything. The numbers dropped. Now, just not to get ahead of ourselves, but when you look at numbers, homicide numbers, the lowest number in homicide was 2017. It was my last full year there, and we were moving quickly. We were taking down gang spots all over the place. With HSI was another partner of ours, the FBI, DEA with narcotics, the ATF with something called Sparta, which I'll explain later about robberies. We started taking these things out like there was no tomorrow. It was just great. And so we closed out 2017 with 200, I think it was 292 murders, under 300 for the first time since before World War II, or somewhere around that area. So that hadn't happened before. Less than 800 murders when we used to average 800 shootings when we used to average 5,000 shootings a year. And it was not me; it was the men and women. I'll tell you, they really responded, and they liked the federal task forces. We opened them up in cybercrime too. One with the FBI, one with the NDA. We opened up I said Sparta. And I'll read it for you: Strategic Pattern Armed Robbery Technical Apprehension. That's the Sparta team with the ATF. Two things they did: commercial robberies and home invasions. They concentrated on that, and they took those perpetrators they made and put them into the federal system, the eastern and southern districts. And they're now all of a sudden the same thing we're doing to gang members, you're doing to career robbery people. And so all of a sudden, there were months going by where we didn't have a single home invasion because we took down all these teams. So everything was clicking at that point. In 2017, going into 2018, my last 4 months on the job, everything was pop, 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 pop. We were really moving forward to low numbers. And you look at it, I did some work now. In that time, in 2017, we had 5,676 GLAs. GLA is not the end of the world crime, but it is something you have to look at. And last year, in 2023, the last recorded year that I found was they had 15,795. So that's 10,000 plus more than they had in 2017. What are we doing wrong now? I look at these things, we can do better. But you have to, with all the technology and stolen property, grand larceny, the same thing. We came up with a grand larceny division that was looking into all kinds of different scams around the city. Outside the U.S., with the credit card things, machines that we're using all over the place, we started taking down those people as well. So we were doing a lot of work. I had at one point in my time 8 detective bureaus and about 12 detective divisions. And then comes 2016, which kind of changed everything for me. Bill Bratton gave me a narcotics division. He gave me OCCB. Wanted to blend the two on a re-engineering thing. So now I had this going on, and now I had all of narcotics division, all of vice division, all of auto crime as well. So big changes there, close to 6,000 people, just under 6,000 people in the detective bureau at that time. Lots of work, Mike.
Absolutely. Because I was going to ask you about that. I'm like, that is a big bureau in and of itself, and it has its own prestigious history in and of itself, taking down the mafia, taking down different gangs of different sorts throughout its time. And then they decide to put it in the detective bureau. So that's quite the task. And outside of the merger of the 3 police departments in 1995, transit housing into the NYPD that spring, that's probably the second largest merger the NYPD has seen in the last 30 years or so. And I'm sure you didn't handle it alone. You had help, but just to handle that in your last year, what helped that process smooth it out over time? Because it's on the good side, you're getting a lot of personnel, but holy crap, that is quite the work to do, as you said.
Yeah. So, and I was by the way, I was in narcotics division. So I understood they had an affinity for the unit. And so you really had to sell yourself. I remember going around to different squads, different places, and talking to them. And so this is going to give you opportunity now. I will tell you, I did narcotics. It's a grind. It's a rough life. It really is. Even though you're soft clothes, you're working all hours. And you're chasing guys on foot. They got guns. It's a lot of work. And it's kind of like a young man's game because you need to be youthful to chase bad guys. And so now I'm giving you opportunity. Now you come work and do something else if you wanted to. And so we did that. And I brought over Chief Brian McCarthy, who helped me a lot. He was chief of narcotics at the time. I wanted to keep him because I needed his knowledge. And we did. We kept him. We gave him all the units, the specialized units in narcotics, the DEA task force and all the other stuff that they had too. And I will tell you, I was getting dailies from Brian. I was so impressed with them. Um, and you can't even talk about what they've done for the most part. You couldn't release it because one case led into another case. So you couldn't put it out of press that you just took 20 kilos outside the city coming in from Mexico. You couldn't put that stuff out because you're going to take that and work on your next thing, or that you just recovered 30 keys up in the heights. That happened a lot. That happened a lot. It was not unusual to see that coming in. You were dealing with the Coast Guard down. There's a lot of stuff you were dealing with the borders. It meant a lot. Brian bore a lot of that for me, which I still appreciate to this day. So I was in charge of it, but you still had the same mechanisms, right, with narcotics. And narcotics, as far as crime, causation of crime was on the wane, but it was still there. It was still ruining lives and still destroying parts of our city. So you had to keep doing it. So it was important to do that. Again, with when we got Vice, it was really understaffed, the Vice Division, and human trafficking. We started the human trafficking task force just to do something about the in South American women coming in, being brought in to work as prostitutes, sex workers in different parts of the city. We opened that up just for that, and we wanted to ramp up our efforts too. By this time, the strolls, the street stuff was gone. So now we had to look at the computer things. It was ruining people's lives. And so I got a great Jimmy Klein to run that for me, take over for Vice. He did a great job with that. And we started the task force with the FBI, another task force, which helped us out, which was involved in the Epstein case and other big cases as well. So tremendous work done by a lot of talented cops.
Oh, absolutely. And shout out to them for the work that they've done then and continue to do. Now, of course, the age limit makes you retire after 34 years on the job in 2017, which always sucks because, especially if you really love the job, yes, there comes a time where you have to move on to other things. But when you really enjoy it, it's hard to walk away. And there's very few professions you can say that about. Policing certainly is one of them. But like I said in the introduction of you an hour or so ago, you've kept busy. One of the gigs that you have now, I'll talk about New York Homicide in a moment, but ABC News, they frequently consult your expertise and experience on different matters. So tell me about how you were going to say, how did that opportunity came to be?
Oh, they came to me. What do you think? You don't retire just yet. You still got plenty of life in you. So I was thinking about getting a headhunter and going out and get a corporate job, which I really didn't want to do. But I would have done it at least for 2 years. And so I didn't do that. They came to me. They came with this offer to speak for them. Now they knew I had the Weinstein investigation, and I had a lot of information on that to talk about. One of my bigger cases, and others. So I've been with them now. I think it's 6th year with ABC. So and I know I'm like a fireman. They call me, listen, we got a shooter, an active shooter down in Georgia. Get on the line and start talking. And I do. I understand. I don't have a lot of information, but I want to give people a base what that chief is going through and what the protocols are that they have to go in immediately and neutralize that threat. So I talk about that. I talk about homicide investigations at length on Gilgo, at length on Idaho State, and those things. What are investigators looking for? What happens after the arrest, which is important in homicide investigations now. After the arrest, accumulation of evidence, and you see that in Gilgo. They go and they hit the computers and they get all this stuff now that they didn't have before. So these are all things like I say to everybody, a technology-based investigation, evidence-based investigation in a homicide case is the best because it's human error-free and it's also bias-free. Science doesn't lie, and DNA evidence doesn't lie. And probably the biggest case I had of DNA evidence was Karina Petrano.
I was going to ask you about that. Yep.
So it shuts down the whole thing. All the noise people making on the side and saying it's this and it's not. It's not. It was sexual assault, and I have his DNA under her fingernails. So those are the two main things there, and other big cases as well. This technology, and a shout out to Phil Pulaski, he built a great forensic investigation division, which solved most of my big cases, and just a great bunch of people there working, 24/7 and out in the cold, out in the heat, doing a great job for us. Without that collection and with the evidence, with the abilities we have now, It's incredible. It's incredible. And you're going to see the clearance rates on homicides go through the roof, which we lead anyway in the country. So it's going to go even more now.
Mhm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's, again, a testament to the work that's been done over the years. That Vetrano case, I remember it well. Jimmy O'Neill had just become police commissioner. That was, I think, one of his earliest weeks on the job. He had been chief of department when Bratton retired and he took over. And she was such a beautiful girl. They're all heartbreaking no matter what happened. But there was a girl who was so full of life, had a great life ahead of her. Just an absolutely gorgeous girl who has her life end so violently like that. So I'm glad you guys took care of that case, man, because that really broke my heart. I remember that case like it was yesterday.
A friend of mine, one guy in my office, Jimmy O'Sullivan, comes in to me. He's first grade, works for me, one of my main guys. He goes, my brother's in England right now, and they're all talking about you. I said, England, where? In London, in London. He goes, you're on the telly over there, and you're describing this case because it went worldwide.
Yeah.
Here now, women are not safe to go run, and that was the takeaway on that in their own neighborhoods by themselves, and that's scary. So that was it was a really monumental case at the time. We solved it 6 months to the day, which was crazy. But great work all the way around. It goes back to my original thing: technology, science. It solves cases now. It's going to solve this thing out in Idaho State. Solve this thing in the beach, Gilgo Beach. It's the way forward now. There's no human error in this thing. You're not going to get a reversal that someone goes back on an ID. This is something important. Phone work, everything. Because if the killer on Vetrano, it happened right next to this Bell Parkway. So we couldn't get any triangulation on our phones. There was so many. But once we got his phone, he was there at that specific time. So that old post-arrest evidence that came through, things you're seeing now in the big cases, you don't stop with the arrest. You keep going. And you build a case so compelling that that person's going to try to take a kind of a play the best they can.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And since you mentioned Gilgo Beach, front and center in that investigation was another former NYPD guy you know quite well, Rodney Harris. Did a great job overseeing that task force of detectives who were able to solve that case. Former NYPD chief of department in his own right for a brief time before he retired. So yeah.
Did a great man, and not only that, Rodney will tell you this.
Mm-hmm.
Just about the entire Suffolk County District Attorney's Office around NYPD.
Mm-hmm.
People work for me. Tremendous. They really attorney smart guy. He grabbed all people retired, and he grabbed them. He gave them jobs out there, and look what they did.
Yeah, did a great job. That's for sure. That's for sure. And before we get to the rapid fire, of course, as I mentioned, the introduction of you, New York homicide. So this is another extension of your involvement in the TV business to look back on these cases of yesteryear. And they may not have been cases that grabbed significant international headlines, but they still exemplify the great work that NYPD detectives have done. We talked about our mutual friend Scott Wagner, and you featured him, which I appreciate. So tell me about being able to start this, being able to narrate it, serve as a consulting producer on it, and of course, the all too critical thing that's the hardest thing of all sometimes, getting a network to buy in and accept it and put it on the air.
So it's quite a tale. Now, I did not seek this. They came to me. They went to Bill Bratton first, the producers, and said, we're looking for someone to do a case on New York homicides. He says, why don't you talk to Bob Boyce? That's what he does. He came to me. We start talking. Now, you look at the time frame here. It's in the aftermath of George Floyd. And police are getting destroyed around the country, and by everybody. It's just a bad time, and it just nobody wants to fund the police. All started, and I was like, "It's not us. Look what we do. We're the good guys. So why don't we show who the good guys are and show you what we do and how we feel about our victims and how dedicated we are to our cases?" And in that pursuit, NYPD detectives have no peer. They're the best. I know I'm biased, but that's the way I look at things. So we took a look at that, and I said, I will never hurt the mothership. I'll never hurt the NYPD. So you know now, if that happens, we stop. Everything stops. I won't do this show. Not about ripping the police here. I want you to show how we break down and do these cases. So the first year, and you're right, we're just about selling it. My wife's a retired homicide detective, and
I had no idea.
it's before me too. By the way, she made her own bones and was out homicide. Right. So we went out there to pitch the show, and they loved her. They loved me. We went there. We were sitting there, and she got a guy looking at very NYPD-ish, and they're all in jeans and t-shirts. It's Hollywood. And we sold the show. We went to three networks, and Oxygen bought the show, and then we put together a spoiler that something like that, little caption trailer, a sizzler they called it, and we did that on the show. We showed them what it would, casework and things like that, and we put together the first year 12 episodes, and there was a lot of me and my wife calling, talking to detectives and asking them to come on the show, which we did. So we put the first year in, you really don't understand, well, how long is this going to go? We made our statement, and they called us up in the next year and said we want 20 more. Did that, and now, in which we did Korea, Viano in the second year. We did L&B's Pomoni Gardens, and now we're doing another 20, which I'm filming now, which I'm doing right now. We film those in East New York, Brooklyn, by the way, just so you know. We don't leave the area. We stay in the same place. But the thing is, it's about the detectives, about the family, and that's what's important. And I want to hit the neighborhoods. It's not just Midtown. It's just what's our audience is Midwest folks and throughout the country. I want to show them every little community we have, and we do. That's why we take them to Brooklyn. That's why we take them to the Bronx and Queens and all these other Staten Island. We hit a lot because those are New York ethnic neighborhoods that we have to show, and it's a melting pot here. It still is after all these years. So and the detectives don't look well. There's some of them handsome people, but others look like tough, gritty detectives, and they are with New York accents. So it's not Law and Order. It's not Kojak. It's none of those things. It's NYPD, and that you see our detectives doing their job and how they're feeling at the time. And a couple of guys really show you that how emotional they are, which is really important to show. And the families really love it because it gets to show their loved one, and people didn't forget about them. They still be remembered on the show. So it's important. It's really has been so much more than I thought it would be, to be honest with you. In dealing with Hollywood types and putting together these shows, going back to headquarters, getting detectives to come on the air, finding good, really interesting cases, which is a lot of these detectives solve their cases within 24 hours. They got a prisoner. You see them on the perp walks every night. That's how quick they are. So now you want a little something more that you can spend an hour and show them how they did it. And that's the hardest thing to do is find that. The cases that take a little bit longer.
Hmm. Hmm. There's not a lot of them, thanks to the work that they do and the expediency at which they do it with. But, listen, sometimes there's patience in this struggle. 'Cause some of these cases are cold cases. They take a long time to solve, but NYPD detectives exhibit it. Sometimes here stateside, in the cases of some detectives, sometimes in different parts of the world, especially Joint Terrorism Task Force detectives, think about where their journeys take them. It takes them all over the world, quite literally, to where I'll never forget one former guest of this show said that one of the nicknames a federal agent came up and told him the department had, amongst other law enforcement agencies, was NYPD, the world police. And in many senses, the NYPD is indeed the world police, not just in terms of how they go about solving their cases, but how they are presented in media. Everyone knows two departments from this country. That is the LAPD and that is the NYPD. And that is certainly another factor that's covered quite extensively with New York homicide. So I'm glad you opened up about that. It is now time for the rapid fire section of this program. We're going to do a little bit differently than we normally do tonight. 5 hit and run questions from me, 5 hit and run answers from you. You could say pass if you want. Now, you answered one of the questions already when you discussed the Vitrano case. I was going to ask you what was one of the more challenging cases you encountered in the Detective Bureau. You mentioned that one. So we'll skip ahead to the second one, which is what did it mean to you to be a part of the NYPD during 9/11? We talked about it earlier. And how did it shape your style of leadership to go through a major event like that and see the resiliency the agency responded with?
Well, you know what? I had anger. To be honest with you, we all were angry. We're angry people because they attacked our city, and then you really want to know who did this, and you want to bring them into custody. You want to fight them. To be honest with you, but we took that and we went down to the largest crime scene in the world, and a lot of us got sick and died over that too. A lot, and we're still dying from it too.
Yeah.
So that's a painful memory here. But it gave me a lot of pride that I was working. I will tell you, I remember driving down West Street and people cheering for us, cheering whatever we wanted because we were exhausted. We were working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day for 4 months afterwards. It was exhausting and you're almost ready to drop. And people would buoy you up and clap when you walked in. And I haven't seen that since. I haven't seen that since where people were really behind us in the city, the police department and the fire department too, because they were our brothers. The EMS, all those folks down there. There was a lot of police departments who took part in the cleanup and also the site in Staten Island, that we went through, each finding little pieces of information to give to a family. It was an honorable pursuit. And I look back at it now, people are dying from that exposure to those toxins there. And you don't know your own, what's going to happen to you. You really don't know what's going to hit you. But I was down there too. I could still taste that, those particulates in my mouth from those first couple of days there. It was still airborne. So you remember, you think about that. Oh, and but again, against pride in the NYPD, my big takeaway, my agency, the leadership at the time. So it meant a lot to be part of that and to be part of that effort and understand we have outside enemies in this city, not just people who live here. We have the whole different people who hate us for no reason, and we're freedom's doorstep. So they're going to come to us, New York first, all the time.
Great answer. One of the other questions you answered too, so I won't ask you that. I'll skip ahead because I was going to ask you, how did the landscape of crime in New York City change from the crack era to post 9/11? But you've described that in depth pretty well. So we'll skip past that one, and I'll ask you, just as much fun as it can be in front of the camera, there's plenty of fun behind the camera too. So what's your favorite behind the scenes moment from working on New York Homicide?
Oh, from New York Homicide.
Mhm.
I think it's that I just when I call the detectives and I talk to them, I hear them open up with pride. Because I talk to everyone who comes on the show, either me or my wife does, and we hear them take pride in their work, and they tell us things that we never knew about the case, and they're like, boss, and they go into a whole thing, and we never expected this guy to do it, so it was a little bit of a surprise that he did it. I remember, I will tell you, in Corina Vetrano, when we grabbed the perpetrator, um, the sergeant came back to me and told the chief, they go, it's not him. When we talked to him, when we went to get the DNA on Chanel Lewis, it's not him. He's a nerd. He's a weirdo. He's a nerd. It's not him. And he goes, he's got no friends, lives in the basement. He's a weird guy. I said, oh, you just described the serial murder to me, by the way. So I said, we're going to run this DNA anyway. And then we got the hit the next day. And the first call was to Jim O'Neill. Because I promised him we get the arrest. I knew we would. It's just a matter of time. You just have to keep pressing sometimes. The grit, the determination, all that matters.
Indeed. And the last question, the rapid fire, I should say, is after decades in law enforcement and still involved in it in the private sector, what advice would you give the next generation of detectives specifically?
Develop your communication skills, because that's the most important thing you can have. Sure, it's great to have experience and being savvy, but to build the ability to talk to someone, to extract information that they may not want to give you, and also in other instances show sympathy and empathy for your victims, and even people, sometimes even the perpetrator, you feel sorry for them. It's just the way it is. And so understanding that communication is the key to making big arrests and having a successful police career. Being able to communicate, understanding people, understanding when they put you in a neighborhood you know nothing about, but all of a sudden you're part of the neighborhood now, and understand they need you there. And the best way you can help the job is communicate well. That's the cornerstone of any great detective.
Once again, well said. Chief, this has been fantastic. Stick around. We'll talk off here. A couple things I wanted to run by you off air, so we'll talk. Before I say goodbye to the audience, any shout outs to anyone or anything you want to give?
To the NYPD Detective Bureau, and to my wife too. She drives this thing. We met late, unfortunately. We got married late. Fortunately, we got married, I should say. And so I owe a lot to her. So because I'm basically a lazy guy, I don't know if you understand. It's too much work. I'm getting older, but she's the driver. She's the driver. And so as far as New York Homicide goes, ABC, they treat me really well. And it's nice to be part of an organization that treats you well. And I think that's what the NYPD is now. They're in rough times right now, and I hope they come out shining, and I think they will.
I think they will too. All right. As always, a shout out to everyone that tuned in tonight. I appreciate every one of you that watched via YouTube, LinkedIn, and of course, Facebook as well. So, coming up next on the Mike the New Haven podcast, by the way, thanks for keeping me updated on the game 5 between the Mets and the Dodgers. Mets up 11-6. So, I'll watch the tail end of that as they try to force a game 6 back in LA. And I'll also watch the Yankees aggravate me and take 25 more years off my life tonight with game 4 and the American League Championship Series, and a little bit as the pursuit of a Subway Series, our first in New York City since 2000, rolls on. So coming up next in the Mike the New Haven podcast, we don't have a show for Monday. We're working on that. Working on a show for next Friday as well. So I don't know if we'll have one, but the week after we have two shows booked. One will be with Steve Mancini for another volume of Tales from the Boom Room, profiles of the NYPD's arson, explosion, and bomb squad. Finished up his career in arson explosion. So looking forward to chatting with him. That'll be Monday, October 28th. Friday, November 1st will be the best of the bravest nationwide with North Carolina Fire Chief Dan Jones. So looking forward to those two shows, October 28th and November 1st, respectively. Now, excuse me, for those of you listening on the audio side, for tonight's outro song from their 1995 album, One Hot Minute. It's the Red Hot Chili Peppers coming your way with Aeroplane. In the meantime, on behalf of producer Victor and retired NYPD Chief of Detectives Bob Boyce, I am Mike Colón. We will see you next time. Have a good weekend. Have a safe weekend. And let's go Yankees. Take care. Good night. Be well.